pull it out and shoot them. We have an article up about an interview that they conducted with him there in Austria, as well as the interview that was today on the Alex Jones Show. Guardian journalist gets midnight raid by Bilderberg police. It didn't stop just with this checkpoint. And of course, what he's talking about in the article and what he talked about in the interviews with us was the fact that he got a midnight visit from the police. They came into his apartment, hung around for 15 minutes. He got tired of them hanging. Maybe he thought if he took off his clothes and took a shower, they would leave. They didn't. They waited. So I guess they were there for about a half hour or so. They're still there. They told him, get dressed when he gets out of the shower. Get dressed. We're going to take you out to your car again. And they inspected his car yet again. Nothing but harassment. So I ask you, what does this tell us about the two different groups? Does it tell us perhaps that at the G7, we've got a lot of essentially powerless figureheads who are doing precisely as they were told? People like John Boehner, bagmen, frontmen, vassals of the multinational corporations that are writing the laws and telling them what to do with these transatlantic, trans-Pacific partnerships, with all of these trade agreements. They're the ones who are really, truly in power. The people who are writing these trade agreements are now meeting secretly in Bilderberg. We're not even allowed to know who is in attendance. And of course, they have their own rules. They have they call it the Chatham House rules. They don't play by our rules. They create their own separate rules, and they get our elected representatives like John Boehner, like Mitch McConnell, to ignore the Constitution, to ignore the legislative process, pretend it doesn't exist, invent a new one so that they can force these trade agreements upon us. That's what's really going on. And when you look at the fact that they want nothing to come out of this meeting, that they come down with an iron fist on everyone who is there, as we've had other reports about how they're jamming cell phone signals, perhaps eavesdropping on cell phones there, this massive security cordon there, that tells you that you are truly at the center of power there and not at that fake PR event that they call the G7. Now, we're going to be right back after the break. We're going to talk more about these partnerships and essentially about this trade promotion authority that will be coming up for the final vote to make it effective, let's say, perhaps tomorrow, but certainly this weekend. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Now, as I reported at the beginning of the news, they're hoping to have a vote this weekend in the House on the fast-tracked authority. Once that's put through, they'll be able to ram through, and now the current tally is 4 different trade agreements that they've got ready to run through this. And of course, they can do this for 6 years once they get the authority without any further input really from Congress. No amendments, just rubber stamp process. If you want to know what's in the TPP, though, in this short amount of time, you need to go to readthetpp.com. Now, if you click on that, the problem is, as you click on that button, it just keeps moving around and it comes up and says, we're just kidding. You can't read the TPP. That's right, because it's a secret agreement. You know, even though we've got in Europe, they have massive demonstrations, thousands of people opposing the TTIP, the transatlantic partnership there. We saw in the UKIP, as we reported in the last segment, we had Nigel Farage talking about trying to stop this and talking about how they have had more people contact him with calls, with letters than on any other subject ever. Nevertheless, here in America, where we are kind of at the nexus of this, we're the center. We're signing an agreement not only with Europe, but also with the Asian countries as well. We're the linchpin, perhaps because we have the most apathetic, most ill-informed public. Show them readthetpp.com. That might get them curious as to what's going on with this, because we're not going to get any information from our elected representatives. Look at this story. Look at what Paul Ryan is saying. Of course, the guy who might have been vice president if Romney had run, the man who is nearly the Republican vice president, said it's declassified and made public once it's agreed to. And see that picture there of him with Nancy Pelosi? Because, of course, she famously said with Obamacare, we have to pass it so you can find out what's in it. Everybody laughed about that. But, of course, now she and the Democrats are calling on the Republicans, tell us what's in this bill. You should be telling us what's in this bill. You should be open and transparent about it. That's a false game they play between the two of them. The loyal opposition. And you know who they're loyal to? It's not to the American public. It's not to the Constitution. It's to the multinational corporations who have written this secret agreement and want people like Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi to run this thing through, and then they'll tell you what's in it. You notice that he says it's declassified. It's declassified. So in other words, right now it is classified. It'll be declassified once they pass it, but right now it's classified. It's very interesting, and it's something that we really haven't talked about here at INFOWARS very much, but there's been a lot of legislation lately about trade secrets. Massive penalties enacted for trade secrets. Of course, that will be in the new agreements. You can guarantee that once they pass the transatlantic, trans-Pacific agreements, these other treaties, that'll be a big part of it. But trade secrets are now as important as top secrets because our corporations are being elevated to and above the level of government. That's precisely what's going on. The man who could have been vice president, the Eddie Munster. You know, they say that they're the stakeholders. Today we had the death of Christopher Lee, who for many years played Count Dracula. They're going to wind up playing stakeholders. If they keep doing this, these vampires are going to have some stakes in their heart. But of course, we've seen this all before. We've seen that John Boehner has been the bag man for big tobacco, famously giving out checks on the floor of the House back in the 90s, just before a vote on an issue that was very important to big tobacco. So we have to ask, who is bankrolling this right now? Who's getting paid off? And we have an article up on INFOWARS.com. Big Pharma is revealed as the puppet master behind TPP secrecy. This is from Zero Hedge. They say it is no secret that U.S. healthcare corporations have been among, if not the biggest beneficiaries of Obamacare by socializing cost. Of course, they can compel you to purchase their product, something that you didn't want or need, you weren't buying it voluntarily or you couldn't afford it. They can force you to buy it at the price that they want to sell it to you at. Now, we also see that big pharmaceuticals have initiatives all across the United States right now to force you to inject their vaccines, even though they have legal immunity from anything that might happen. You can't sue them if their products damage you. And understand that as they push these legislative bills through to remove your informed consent, that this is going to be not only for the massive number of vaccines that we have now, but for all the vaccines that they will be developing in the future. And they have every incentive to make every kind of treatment that they come up with be called a vaccine. They don't have that kind of legal immunity if it's an antibiotic. They don't have it for drugs, but they have it for vaccines. So you can imagine that they're going to create a vaccine, whether it's safe, whether it's effective. They're going to be putting it out there and forcing you to take it on their schedule if we don't stop these kind of initiatives throughout the states. That's why they're pushing through these massive trade deals, because they don't want to have to fight these battles like they have GMO labeling on a state-by-state level. They don't even want to fight it at the national level. They want to get it done once. They want to move the authority to a transnational governing body that they can control, and then they won't have to even bother at the national level. He goes on to point out that as far as Big Pharma's involvement in these trade agreements, he says, when it came to the highly confidential TPP, it was unclear just which corporations were dominant in pulling the strings. He said, now, thanks to documents that have been published by WikiLeaks and analyzed by the New York Times, it appears that Big Pharma is once again pulling the strings, this time of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, if passed, will empower big pharmaceutical firms to command higher reimbursement rates in the U.S. and abroad at the expense of consumers. Now, of course, one of the ways that's going to work is they're going to extend the amount of time that they keep their patents for medicine, keeping them out of the generic drug market. Other countries have much shorter time periods than we do here in the United States, so they can extend their copyright length. Understand, that's the same game that Hollywood and the music companies have been playing for quite some time. The goal, the end goal, is for them to have ownership of everything forever. When the IMF did it, it was called rent seeking, when they went in and indebted developing nations to them perpetually, putting them under such a burden of debt that they could never get out. They want to make sure that you will pay them rent for everything, that nothing ever goes into the public domain, whether it's a drug, whether it's a tune, whether it's a movie. They will hold that over your head, and then they will use that to further restrict our freedoms on the internet as well. Now, one last area here of the TPP. This is an article from Observer.com, and they point out that leading the way among TPP nations seeking to sway American policy is Japan, which signed up former Democrat leader Tom Daschle's firm, as well as well-connected public relations firm DCI. Ka-ching! There you go. That's how these guys cash in. Tom Daschle, former House leader, Democrat, he becomes a lobbyist, and he's working to push this thing through, as many others are. Of course, we had Dennis Hastert Also became a lobbyist, made millions of dollars, so much that he could afford to pay off a blackmailer easily. We are seeing the breakdown, the corruption in our government, and we ask, well, how can we get these corrupt animals out? Well, no, we'll just defeat them in the next election. Really? Well, you know, they got to the ballot box before you did, and they're stuffing it and they're controlling it. Stay with us. Right after the break, Leanne McAdoo talks to a local candidate. She is alleging voter fraud here that looks very much like what we're seeing across the nation. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Joining me in studio now is Dr. Laura Presley, PhD. She is a two-time candidate for Austin City Council, and we've watched your campaign closely because we really were in support of this candidacy that sort of rose out of activism. You've been very outspoken about making Austin a fluoride-free city, as well as educating people on the dangers of smart meters and things like that. So it would have been really nice to actually have someone there on the city council with a scientific background. Now, Laura, you're not a career politician, but you ran a really strong race, and I don't think a lot of people were expecting you to have such a massive support there in the district that you were running. Now, we actually went to a runoff here in Austin, and through that process, you might have uncovered a huge issue with the electronic voter machines, not just here in Austin, but actually statewide. So talk to us a little bit about what you discovered.
Well, we had some issues with our election, and we don't know what happened, but we know that the numbers just don't add up. One of the things, you know, we noticed on election night, we had electioneers at every single precinct that voted in my district in the city council. And reports were coming back that we were doing great. Every precinct was showing you're over 60%, you look really good, you've got this in the bag. And then election night, we get the results, Leanne, and you know, my opponent is declared the victor at 2-1, and that was just not consistent with the reports we were getting. Mm-hmm. So, you know, my background is the semiconductor industry here in Austin, and I spent a lot of time in the 17 years in that industry analyzing data and looking at numbers and looking at software issues. And so we went back the next morning and looked at the numbers. We found a lot of issues. There were more ballots than there were voters' names for early voting that Travis County had reported to us as a campaign. There were many people who had cast their ballot by mail, and their names showed up multiple times on voting on different days. And several of those voters I knew. One was a woman, she was in a wheelchair, and I know she didn't vote 3 times. So that was really a flag for us. And so we also started looking at the data. We looked at our November election, which was a general election with about 8 candidates in it, and then we had a runoff in December with 2 candidates, myself and my opponent. And we noticed some repetitive mathematical patterns in the data. The relative percents that I received in the top precincts in my district, we got 35.1% back in the November election. And then in the December runoff, we got exactly the same percent again. This is absolutely not making sense because not only were there 6 weeks between the 2 elections, 4,000 voters attrited out. And so to remain the same just doesn't make sense. We had also 3 precincts where exactly the same results from the November to the general election in December stayed the same. That is not credible either. So we said something's wrong. You know, what's going on? Are there you know, electronic results that maybe weren't erased that were maybe used again in the December elections? Just some mistake, or was there, you know, some other type of more serious issue? So what we looked at, we had a statistician look at our data, and he asked us to plot on the x-axis and the y-axis the November election versus the December election. And we did that for multiple candidates and myself. And you can see other candidates have these kind of blobs, these scatter plots, where our election was exactly a straight line. That is highly unusual and not expected. So again,
the data looks
a little problematic. It looks, and people who like math, like I do, you know, look at this and go, oh, there's no way.
Yeah.
This is a big, big problem. So what did we do about it? We said, let's do a recount. We think there's an issue. Maybe some errors occurred. Let's do a recount. And interestingly, in the Texas statutes, you can do a manual recount of ballot images for electronic voting. So we did that. So we went to Travis County, we did the recount, And one thing we found in that recount, the ballot by mail results were very different than the electronic results. The ballot by mail showed exactly a